Welcome to part one of this episode on pivotal clarity. Today, I sit down with Amit Pande to discuss practical AI tools, marketing, and GTM in AI. Let's get started. Today, we have with us our guest Amit Pande. Amit is a close friend, and I've known Amit for over 2 decades now. He spent the last 2 decades building software products for companies large and small, and in some cases, help design them, market them, and do more things with that. Amit worked at Oracle and Yahoo, and he designed AI products at startups like Tact and Aviso. Amit is a person that I always go to whenever I have questions about go to market, especially when it is about doing across multiple geographies. He's built and led teams across different continents. Amit, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rajan. Congratulations on the successful launch of Pivotal Clarity.
Amit, let's start with a very simple question. What is your favorite AI tool?
My favorite AI tool these days is actually Loom. I never thought of it as an AI tool, but as I've started using Loom more and more, and in the process of building a lot of things from scratch right now, I've realized the tools I'm using on a daily basis, the simple things that they do, some of the cancellation, some of the transcript editing, so that I can cut out all of my hours, silences, listen to myself at 2x. I don't even know how much of that is advanced AI, but it's just fascinating to see how well that's been working. And in a personal sense, I've been tripping a lot on animal-based art, which I like making through Meta's AI assistant in WhatsApp, because it just feels like a very natural way to use AI. I know it's not like Midjourney or Cutting Edge, but just that integration into WhatsApp, and then sending that bootleg to my favorite people that I create different kinds of art from. That's been on the personal side.
I think we all underappreciate how much Meta can do in the AI space. Like they came in as a late entrant, but they've been quietly and sometimes maybe even loudly releasing products, and they all just continue to impress us, isn't it?
Absolutely. One of the really interesting things, I don't know if this is happening to everybody, but I'm experiencing this with my own Meta AI, that it keeps prompting things like, so if I ask it to make a scene with a, 18th century setting with like an elephant and a monkey having tea in a forest or something, then it'll immediately then prompt me, would you like to see yourself as the central character in X? And I've never taken the bait, but when I think about some of the things we'll talk about today, between now and a perfect simulacra, where we are in a constructed reality, you can think of it as the kind of reality that Thanos is able to create in Avengers in an instant, right? It feels like the tendrils of the future are like finding their way into these messages, one message at a time, and sort of tempting us into that. And I'm comfortable now with making my own AI replica. I've been experimenting with some tools on that, but I haven't reached the stage where I feel the need to see myself as the central character in arcs and narratives that I may never live. But I feel like we're not that far from Meta with the glasses and everything, taking us to that kind of science fiction that we probably saw in the 1980s.
Amit, you worked at Tact almost about 8 years ago, right? And at that particular point in time was really cutting edge in terms of the AI that they were building. What is different between like what happened when you were working at Tact and what is happening now?
You're familiar with this, so we can use it as a reference point that the old Carlota Perez deployment installation cycle, when I think back to TACT, or I think back to working in HP in the enterprise mobility side or other things, it is so true, man. It is so true that at the time, the vision of a personal AI assistant for every seller that can, capture your meeting notes and be by your side and so on, which we were building in 2017, 2018, now that feels trivial. But specifically at a technology level, also, at the time, I remember the NLP engineers would tell me that intents was really hard. And, I still remember the architecture diagrams from those days. It feels like you can't talk about those today because it's just sort of assumed that those things are trivial. And I think this is causing a bit of a false narrative also, that I'm sure this problem is already solved, but it's still not. I mean, you'd agree with me that voice to voice, where we can keep walking around like the movie Her, that is still not there yet. Will it happen? I don't know. But uh, so you're absolutely right that in sales, this has been a great example that the seller AI assistant that Tact, Conversica, and some of the companies at that time were doing in 16, 17, 18 is only now in the form of actually not just in the tech companies that are in sales tech, but also, I guess, Microsoft Copilot, Glean, and some of these. They're showing that vision from 7 years ago.
What do you make of the speech to speech announcement that happened in Dev Day, day before yesterday?
I haven't fully caught up with it yet, but one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is going back to kind of where I started my career in UX design, that atmosphere will continue to play a huge role. When you are engaging with the voice personality, even the subtle choice of waveform and how natural it feels, I think that has a huge bearing on how you feel about the technology. The thing that I've been most interested in, and I haven't seen the demo to know if they've matched up to Hume or they've exceeded Hume in the emotion detection and sort of response to that. Even across hundreds of people I've spoken with this year, one common theme is that an effective voice to voice interface, which may be purely voice to voice or voice plus multimodal, for a lot of people still feels more human like than text on one side, which kind of feels still conversational but not human like. And then of course the digital human era is just starting to unravel, but it's a couple of years away from it. So if I show someone like you see something sophisticated in 3D versus voice, you immediately hear people saying, oh, this just feels so much more human like. And just one observation on that, and I think this is where OpenAI is doing really interesting work on setting the ceiling and the floor in a way that it's uh, it's definitely making it possible for more and more people to quickly launch these voice agents. But more importantly, I think it's showing us use cases of things that long unsolved problems. If you remember last Dev Day when they showed the Khan Academy story with Salman Khan's son, and then like they're looking at that thing, I said, this if done right would have an impact on education. And so I would go back to an era you might remember. You might remember 20 years ago when companies like CKS Consulted existed in Bangalore. And and you were a mobile maven. So you remember the time that there was this idea that mobile would transform education. It's taking that long, but it feels like now this could really have this other effect of any voice to any voice, the original Douglas Hofstadter Babelfish happening in a way that we don't need to get into this, but the dominance of the West versus the spreading of ideas everywhere. I think it's been great to see. To be honest, demo days and dev days be about demos and devs, not about we won't get into the alternative.
Yeah, so that's so true. I want to sort of go into something which is very related to this. Back in the days, you're working with consumer company, you have a design background, then you used to sort of design products from a product and what people will now call as product led growth. I mean, I tell folks that product led growth is like, make an awesome product. So you worked on products like that, and then now most recently you worked with enterprise. And when I look at startups that are doing well, I mean, I think those two opposite ends of the spectrum, even B2B companies which are taking a product led approach of building awesome product that it triggers word of mouth and then amplified further. So those type of products are taking off. On the other hand, there is like top down, starting from the board, then pushing to the CEO, and then selling anything that is available by the GTM team. That when they are putting it on AI, that is getting traction. Companies like Lean and Writer and others, right? So there are these two extreme ends of like GTM, and now like there is role of AI also in GTM. So how are you seeing, like talk a little bit about GTM and AI and its overlap, and your thoughts on that.
I think first off, while there are successes where there are companies which just did one of these two models, an Atlassian or a Viva, uh, I think it's generally been very difficult for companies, uh, the majority of companies, to just stick to one model and do exceptionally well there. Now, I think Viva and the very specialized vertical model where the number of players that enter the market itself is limited, and you have all sorts of other funky like five forces interactions that actually help startups to charge 250K, 500K, and so on per customer. It is possible that you just have a great sales team, you have a very particular product for the vertical, and you keep like building that kind of business out that we were in. But if you look really far, there are only so many successes like that. Now, on the other hand, the PLG world you mentioned, there's a lot more successes there. But I think this no man's land is very dangerous, risky, and I've seen more companies, including ones I've been with, where we got both right. It's just really difficult to do right. And I think one of the interesting things is that doing both right is not just about getting your go-to-market model right. And I'll just make an observation like above and below. So when I say above, what I mean is the organization structure, classic command and control, actually works really well for a Viva-like company. Actually works really well for an OpenAI-like company. Right? You have maybe 3 business lines. It works sort of really well. You may not have everything documented. If the CEO gets sucked up by a plane in the sky, you're in trouble. But it works well for whatever it's worth. The problem is that if that model is a complete misfit for PLG in a way, right? Because at the end of the day, you think about the products that have the best onboarding, for example. In many ways, it's a shame that despite so many products having good onboarding, more products have shitty onboarding. But you can directly translate the lack of design effort, PM effort, and perhaps even writing effort into like copy of the campaign sequences and such directly into like I wouldn't necessarily call them B players, but sometimes A players in B environments are basically B players too. And that's because the notion is what you said, that whatever sells, let's sell it. So I think that the companies that are in the middle that are trying to get this hybrid of pure PLG, sales assisted PLG, and then classic enterprise sales, I think they've somehow figured out a way to marry command and control with enough that decentralization, because you and I both know as people who've built things that it usually takes a couple of weekends of some inspired work for an onboarding flow to happen. The rest of it, the Jiras and the stories and the whatever process you want to call it, and UCD and whatnot, those are nice ways to describe it. But ultimately, it's the imagination and inspiration of people. Now, in terms of go-to-market and AI, just 3 quick observations. I think the first is that the imbalance is real. Sales tech has been the most overserved, marketing tech a little less overserved, customer success tech, sales engineering tech, all this tech only now starting to get attention. Customer success tech, I don't know. I mean, it still feels like it's getting rolled up into sales tech basically. But certainly this sales engineering type of tech, pre-sales tech, I find this very interesting because this means that enough niches are getting the distribution of energy in go-to-market. But there's also this counter trend happening, which is that the future of CRM is not CRM, right? The future of CRM is autonomous GTM. The future of marketing automation is autonomous marketing, whatever that might mean. So the specialization and then the compression of the AI GTM stack are both happening together. So that's one I think is super interesting. And then the second interesting trend is the replacement of a lot of the tasks that otherwise most companies are just never able to afford. Classic example, the first time I had a digital marketing team ages ago, I had a guy who was a really good digital marketing leader, and he said, okay, we need a normal SEO person and a technical SEO person. And I said, okay, I'm not as smart at SEO as you might think I am, because I came up through these other ranks. Why do I need these 2 people? And when he explained it to me, I still didn't understand it, but I understood that the roles were different. Now, there's an interesting question of I think the sports equivalent in different sports is the utility infielder or the all-round player, right? If AI creates an all-round GTM player, what does that mean? Now, you can't have the sales engineer also be the product marketer. But you could, in theory, say that a good, and we know people like these, oh, hey, he or she is a really good content marketer, product marketer, brand marketer in one. So I think AI, like taking on portions of these roles, makes it really possible to think of GTM the way one thinks of elastic cloud instances. That you spin them up when you need them, you spin them down. But what this also means, and hopefully this is good news for labor versus capital, that it means that a smaller set of people can actually run your entire go-to-market team with a swarm of these things around. Now, whether you use Mayfield's language or you use like co-worker language, digital worker language, I don't really have an opinion on that. I think eventually we'll have to make peace with the fact that a lot of these teammates are future replacements of us. And then the last thing I'll say about GTM is that the pain is very real. That the biggest opportunity, the pain, when I say the pain, I mean the $2.64 being spent to get $1 of new revenue, or 50% of both the stacks in sales and marketing are not used, or quota attainment is worse than 10 years ago. All that shit is true. So what this means is that these new companies that are coming in, I do think they have the best opportunity in the coming years to replace those systems of record that people have put in pitch deck slides for VCs. But think about it. Day, Clarity, Attio in the CRM space, they happen now. Like, at least the question of challenging old CRM. But in the last decade, we never saw any of that. And I think that's great, right? We believe in good competition and fairness. So I think it's ultimately all very good for the consumer of GTM, which continues to be a great consumer, growing, spend at 20-30%.
So Amit, you said something very interesting. You said that the future of CRM is autonomous GTM, and I think in that phrase there is a lot to unpack, and especially when changes happen like this, usually we make sense of the world through like common monikers of words like CRM, and people get it. But like this autonomous GTM seems to be completely different, right? So to understand that, we'll have to maybe break it down into first principles and then say what is GTM. Maybe can you explain what is GTM and then say what is autonomous GTM and why autonomous GTM is the future of marketing. Otherwise, it'll be hard to sort of make the leap between saying, okay, CRM gets replaced by autonomous GTM, which is like a powerful statement.
It's a really important question. I think part of why CRM is such a big monolith for people wanting to take it down is that historically it hasn't actually delivered the value for what people to the promise, right? The cloud CRMs promised the cloud CRM became the same thing that Siebel was, and so on.
Yeah, and Siebel was called as contact management, right? So it went from contact management to CRM, and then people said that the future of CRM seems like CXM, which is customer experience management, and then it has not lived up to the hype.
And then actually it split, right? Because you're right, customer experience ended up only becoming something that happens kind of in like these fuzzy functions between sales and marketing, and is often owned by like certain other teams. And actually the chief experience officer never happened. Just like the chief customer officer sort of happened and then didn't happen. So let's break this down, right? Ultimately, I do like this idea over time that has developed, that there's a product team and there's a go-to-market team. So all the people that are involved with building the product in a classical sense, engineers, designers, DevOps, UX, whatever, PMs, you are all part of one product team. Now, how do you take the product to market? How do you find out who to market it to? How do you think about where to play, who to compete with, how to price it, how to think about competition? That's the starting point of go to market. But then you have to actually go to market, and that's where it's interesting, because your channels, the approaches you take to now reach this audience, I think of this as almost like you have a blueprint then at some point, which is your go-to-market strategy, and some of the tooling that supports your go-to-market strategy. And then you essentially have like digital road warriors and real road warriors. And what I mean by that is your salespeople, whether they're pre-sales or they're account execs, VP of sales, SDRs, BDRs, partner development reps, doesn't matter. They're essentially your road warriors. But the interesting thing about modern go-to-market is that, if buyers are spending 6 out of 7 minutes in digital, essentially they're dealing with your digital road warriors, which is that little trail you left on TikTok, or that thing that is on G2 that you may not like, but it's there about you. And so if you think about the entirety of all of this, this is a go-to-market team classically thought of as marketing, sales, customer success. And then, the teams that help manage this, you can think of it as largely sometimes business ops, but mostly revenue operations, sales operations, marketing operations. There is a trend towards unified go-to-market operations also, but I would say that as of circa October 3rd, 2024, marketing ops and sales ops have generally tended to own their own domains because the tools are, sort of slightly different. So, what is the opposite of autonomous? It's manual, but it's also disconnected and it's like fragmented GTM, right? And this is because everyone, going back to classic principal agent, is just doing like their thing. So someone's job is to put the website up, someone's job is to put a contact us form up, someone's job is to train the salespeople so they deliver value. But all of these people are not necessarily always talking to each other. And I think this is fully coordinated. So in some ways, I think if we did a Google trend search, probably somewhere in this last decade, GTM or go to market became a thing. And in some ways, just like BYOD, it's a thing and it's not a thing, but it's been adopted by the most modern companies in the world. And I think that's why it's been very healthy, because it has re-energized salespeople to say, I'm part of GTM. It's re-energized marketing to say, I'm part of GTM. And part of why I said that the focus of the future CRM could be thought of as autonomous GTM is that of all the GTM tech that exists today, CRM, even though it's basically still a bunch of integrations and custom fields and all on top of these like account contact activity databases, it's a big elephant in that room. And so in a way, there is no CRM equivalent in marketing. Marketing does not really have a system of record till today, if you think about it. You know that HubSpot doesn't count. I could rip my HubSpot out in my last job, and I would probably still largely deliver the same like pipeline goal. So now, when you think of autonomous, I think the first step towards that is okay. So you connect these pieces in a better way. Once they're connected in a better way, then you can say it's more unified. Then you say, okay, are there parts of it that we can automate? So then it's more unified and automated. Where it gets autonomous in the classic like level 1 to level 5 of self-driving cars, and we're a long way from there. What's interesting to me in thinking about it that way is that you don't think of it as a sales or a marketing or a customer success problem. You ultimately think of it as, I had a product, that product had to hit the market and somehow serve the needs of my buyers, and those buyers are actually not like, they're basically just state changes of the same object. At some point, everybody's a buyer for you. And then, once they become advocates for you, they're still buyers. They just, face changes. So I think the best analogy I'll give you is maybe, and this is something I know you've done a lot of thinking on in the past, is the shift to autonomous GTM, I think, is as much a shift to automation, multi-agents, all of that. But I think it's also a shift in theory to what you would call more connected ecosystems and marketplaces. Where if the value exists, it can traverse through a network faster and reach who it needs to reach. And I actually think this is good for the small guy. And certainly we can talk about autonomous marketing or talk about something else, but I do think of autonomous marketing and sales as like subsets of this larger movement towards autonomous GTM.
Just to play back, Amit, what I heard you say is that CRM was this idea of connecting those accounts and contacts through like a database, so that teams that are taking the product to the market after they have created the blueprint, which is the marketing GTM strategy, go to market strategy, they are ensuring that the marketing guys are speaking to the sales guys or speaking to the customer success guys using that account and contact database, so that they are able to keep track of like what conversation happened. It will go through that state change, but it did not fully deliver the promise in the sense that it did not get them all into the same page, which was the purpose of that central system of record that we call a CRM. Now in autonomous GTM, because AI can deal with a lot of unstructured data, which is the biggest problem in getting all of them unified, right? I mean, you have different tools and these tools cannot exchange data, and then not in the right format and structure, and therefore they are all very disjoint. But now that AI can take out a lot of grunt work on bringing that unstructured data together and then also facilitate it, it lays the foundation of getting that autonomous thing. But I also like the fact that you talked about that level 1 to level 5. Can you just click a little bit on that level 1 to level 5 on what it is? And I think that's emerging as a powerful way to think about like a roadmap of how automation will happen. Automation will lead to autonomous.
It's a great question. Puzzle, I think, is one of those companies that does AI for accounting and finance. They have a great level 1 to level 5, for example, for autonomous accounting. And so you're right that creating this type of thinking for any space, finance, HR, marketing, the sales and buyer side, product certainly, is a good way to think about where this is headed. I do think that some of the interesting tension is going to come from like level 3, 4, 5. What I mean is, see, level 1 to 3 is essentially just doing things um, in a way that they should probably have been done in the first place, right? Like it's things are just more connected, and you know what happened, you know why it happened. You know remember the old cliche of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, all of that. But somewhere in this 3, 4, 5, where you're telling me what actions to take, like you're not just giving me insights, you're telling me what actions to take. It does seem that once you bring everyone into this like common space, the difficulty of that cannot be underestimated, man. Like everybody from Salesforce to even a lot of the sales tech tools try to do it. I mean, you've heard of Common Room. They've been coming up a lot in the news recently. I was telling someone the other day that I think Common Room is executing the Salesloft playbook, which is what people thought it would be, which is like, hey, it's actually a workspace. It's a really difficult thing to pull off a workspace. But where I was going is, once you do get the people into the workspace, and now you have this unstructured data that is feeding insights, the frontier right now is between what actions should I take next versus you take actions on my behalf. And so I think that's level 4, level 5 in the autonomy, right? And level 5 is ultimately take actions on my behalf with some oversight from me. And I suppose that the end point of level 5 is it's all happening. I'm off on a beach somewhere or some like holographic reality, and that's where things get really weird and interesting, because we've always believed that human decision making is paramount to the success of organizations. And I think at level 4 we can still maintain that.
Yeah, I'm curious about that level 1 to level 5, how it is described, let's say, in the GTM space, or I'd love to know how the puzzle guys describe it. One version that I've heard is first it starts with an AI co-pilot, right? And the bots are before this, right? So this is first is an AI co-pilot. And AI co-pilot is something that is operating in a synchronous kind of a mode. And then there is assistant. And then there is an agent. I mean, and I'm talking about in a general intelligence perspective. Then comes AGI, and then comes super intelligence.
What you just described is a great way to think about it in the macro sense, right? That absolutely there's and then you get to that point where essentially future ASIs are we can't recognize them because
they're 100 times more powerful than AGI, right? So
exactly. But here's just in the interest of 30 seconds, let me just show you something, because I had this open here as you were talking, right? This is what it looks like. This is what Puzzle had done, right? Autonomous accounting levels, task automation, function automation, problem detection, problem solving, problem resolution automation. And then they sort of describe how each one of these work. And I think what's sort of interesting is that the analogy to self-driving cars, where the human can still take control at any time, versus automation that does not require human attention to get from point A to point B. And I think this is where we're in this interesting era with GTM, because the challenge is that at the end of the day, if you strip out all the other discussion about whether how this impacts jobs, how this impacts costs, and we know that the answers generally show only one direction in terms of how capital can be deployed. But if you take a step back and think about how should you choose what to automate, I would say one, well, anything that's dumb, you should automate it. But at the end of the day, if your buyers, your partners, your stakeholders as a company of a GTM function, they are going to be served better by AI all the way, then which we are seeing for all the crap that SDR tech and next generation email automation tech is getting. It's actually better, because the chances of finding an SDR or somebody writing an email to a director of IT in shipping in Norway, I mean, you need a certain kind of, I don't know, passion for multi-domain understanding to be able to craft a meaningful enough email. Otherwise, you're better off with the formula, right? Hook, action, something, and just, so where I'm going is, if emails are going to be written better, if potentially Zoom calls are going to be handled better, if potentially more and more things are going to be handled better, including pricing and negotiation by AIs that reflect a company's best interest versus some kind of messed up incentive structure that a rep and a CRO have, then the company's moral obligation should be to explore autonomous and AI in that direction, because actually your humans may not be. It's not that they're acting in the worst interest of the company, but they may be acting in the good interests of the company, not the best interests of the company. And I think on the other side of this, just to end that point, it's the individual, right? Because now the individual, which is you or me, as a company of one, we also have access to a lot of the same autonomy. So in a sense, we should be able to have our. You and I are old enough to remember that there was a personal CRM movement which never took off. Never took off. But I think it's an interesting thing. Whenever I see someone who has 250,000 followers on LinkedIn, right? I always think, okay, the next generation of this, it'll be easier for people that are not natives to this to get to that point where they have more optionality, even if AI is going to reduce the net number of jobs. The remaining ones will probably be more valuable.
Amit, since you've actually done this, you've spent more than a decade in Silicon Valley, but before that, you were in India, and then you've also worked with teams that are crossing across border, right? So, what are some of the GTM challenges which are very specific to cross border trying out things? What are mistakes that founders make or GTM teams make when they're trying to actually execute GTM across multiple geography, because they think of distributing the teams across geography will bring them certain cost advantages. And one of the things that I always keep telling folks is that Silicon Valley is not a great place of building products. It's a great place of figuring out GTM, right? So it's always at the cutting edge of the GTM that they can. That's what makes a lot of businesses very, very successful. And those who come from outside, they have that disadvantage. What are mistakes people make when they're coming from outside of Silicon Valley and trying to actually crack a GTM of a business, whether it is PLG or whether it is enterprise led? In both the cases, you'll see that there's cutting edge work happening.
We have to respect the good parts of history sometimes, right? At the end of the day, if you think about the generation of Sun Microsystems, the generation of early AT&T, the generation of both you and I have studied the stories of very interesting Indian Americans from the 80s and 90s who first made it, when it was much harder to make it here from that side of the world. I think there was a level of understanding that all these people had when they got here, that this is the market I'm in. I don't just need to dress like the market. I need to act like the market. So I need to understand the market. Now, one might face the same challenge as a Midwestern or Californian marketer, trying to sell
In Africa.
in Africa, or try to market next generation payment tech in India, which is superior to payment tech in the US. And so I think the problem goes both ways, but especially for the B2B companies we're talking about, which often tend to come from elsewhere. I think there are three things I'll share. One is that this is just maybe just more psychological, but I think this respect for understanding the previous generations of how things happened is important, because the bets people make today over here are based on bets that paid off for a 40-50 year period. The bets were always new, but there were multiple bets. So for example, Google Glass was a disaster. Now whatever's happening in this era of Meta's glasses will probably take things off much more. And so we can learn from that era. And I think one of my challenges with the different geographies we are talking about here, and for some reason, I don't know how or why, but hats off to them, Wix, Monday.com, and Gong, they're all Israeli companies from different eras. I mean, Wix, I didn't know was an Israeli company until much later. And they built this level of marketing and sales finesse sitting there that a lot of companies in other regions, from India, are getting to now. And I think that somewhere they struck that balance between knowing the game and the history of the game, but still playing it your way.
By Wix, you mean the WIX, which had
WIX, the website builder, which apparently a lot of that, and each one of them had a different playbook. Remember, Monday's playbook was video. I think Wix's playbook was like ads, and the B2B cybersecurity side is very well known. But the PLG successes of Israeli companies is lesser known. But I think that every new generation of companies that are coming out from cross border from India as well, more and more entrepreneurs, I think they're getting that balance right more, because see, if you only study the game but you don't still play your new angle in the game, you'll still be left out. Then you're just a student of history. You're not a player. I think the players are good. A lot of the companies I met, for example, in the Opeka portfolio, the word I would use is posture or stance, right? They have a super confident stance in whatever they're doing, and which means that the next to the next to the next generation, they will catch up on the history. But it's still a good idea to catch up with the history too. The second mistake, I think, is ultimately talent, though, right? That I think one of the best things about the go-to-market talent that exists in the Bay, and is anchored here, is just that there is like a generation 3, generation 5, generation 7 type of history. So let's take an example. The highest product marketing jobs in the Bay Area are in the South Bay. Why? My guess is that if you look at salary profiles, I think it's because the highest product marketing jobs are likely going to be in cybersecurity. And the cluster of cybersecurity companies, the biggest ones are all in the South Bay. Basically Old Valley, which SF would consider too far to visit. But at the end of the day, those people who have been doing cybersecurity product marketing or technical marketing, which you and I know is kind of harder than Salesforce marketing, right? In product marketing at least. They've had a 25, 30-year history. I think that when you're a team coming in from overseas, you want the cleverness, right? Cleverness goes a long way. You want the person that moves at the same pace and has moved at the same pace for the last 10 years, because they've seen a different level of history from maybe the semantic days. I think there's not enough appreciation that sometimes tenure actually helps. And the last thing I'll say about just sort of cross-border mistakes is there's sort of this lack of sometimes being bold, which is, I see it changing a lot more now, where in many ways for your buyer, it doesn't matter if you're cross-border, right? So it's a very weird hack, but a lot of companies I see do this now. They say, why do I need a team page? So I think it's a clever hack. If you have a team page where you kind of check the boxes of a good global team page, where you have a cute dog, and you have 2 Romanian people, and you have 3 Indian people, and you have 4 Chinese people, and you have 2 AIs in the future, great. I think that's an awesome team page. It will tell a story, right? But if it's 3 guys out of Nagpur, city where I was born, and you're like, I don't know, people might judge us for it. You know what? Don't even put it on a team page. Ultimately, they don't care. They're not going to buy or not buy from you because you happen to be from somewhere. So I think this is where, going back to where we started our conversation, think about AI that's interesting is that the average AI product today generates better infographics than some random graphic designer sitting in some random place in the world, right? We already know this. And look, grammar is hard. I make mistakes in grammar. I don't even know which mistakes I make sometimes, but it's not, and like many of us, I studied in a convent school, and I probably had the highest marks in English, but my grammar is not very good. And I now know this, but I don't want to think about it. So I think that for cross-border companies, I think it is even more imperative that you use AI in your external communications. Because see, as you said, product gaps are closing. So you don't have a disadvantage on product for the most part. But you have a disadvantage in how you are represented. Because a company that has raised 500 million from Silver Lake or Blackstone will definitely be able to hire 100 people that live in a 20-mile radius in San Francisco, New York, right? And each of those people are advocates, they're powerful. It goes a long way. 50 people to represent. I was talking to a founder earlier today, right? And they've bootstrapped a company for many years, and they're in the competitive sales tech space. And we were discussing this, and I said, like, how many people are there in your company after 3 years that can basically go and tell this story? And I said, you and I both know the answer. It's still you, just you, literally just you. So this is something cross-border companies can overcome, like getting AIs at that interface externally, where now I think that at least in the world of the sort of the Western markets that we are talking about, which includes India and like that sphere, there's a great opportunity to hire some AIs and hire some people. I think that could help.
So, Amit, the one thing that you said was very interesting for me, which is that It said like, people don't care like whether you have the team page or not, and if you are from, let's say, Nagpur, then why even have the team page? But that changed, right? Earlier, if you were like selling enterprise software, right, people had to know that the CD that they are purchasing is going to deliver the promise that the person who's sitting across the table is making. So they had to actually meet each other, run some POCs, and then that will lead to like larger enterprise deals. But then the shift that had happened in the last 15 years was saying that the purchase process had changed from I'm going to sell it to it is bought, right? Which is like from enterprise sales to assisted buying. And that was the whole shift from enterprise to software as a service. And that's where, like, as long as you can deliver a great experience over the web, deliver the product over the web, which is through software as a service, like that change happened. Now with AI, what do you think is happening, right? What is the change in paradigm that is happening, where instead of selling it was assisted buying? Is it assisted like agent buying, or like how is that changing GTM?
I think this is one of the top few frontier areas that is going to go through a lot of transformation for the reasons that you mentioned, and building upon those reasons, buyer facing tech is underserved. A lot of the quote unquote buyer intelligence types of tools are basically ultimately still sold to the CRO, and trying to feed buyer insights into your sales team, but not directly enabling your buyers is a little bit like the classic fox guarding the hen house. It's not going to change anything, because if the sales mindset is that my job is to change your mind so that you buy from me, then that mindset will not change. It's based on a fundamental asymmetry of power and information. And as information democratizes and power shifts over time, it's just become more and more evident than that. To your point, buyers are just infinitely more smarter than sales. People are able to sort of meet them. I've heard uh, now countless stories where companies outside of high tech have been expressing this sort of desire that you're right, like ultimately my buyer just wants to have a good smart conversation with someone who knows what they're talking about. And again, oftentimes that happens to be like three people sort of in the company. So I think that one of the things that will break the dominance of companies that were able to afford like large armies of salespeople is connecting this back to PLG, that if we really have to enable buyers better, we need a new class of technologies that is able to meet buyers and move them along at the speed that they're ready to move at. And it's interesting, right? Like if you think about this as jazz, then when the tempo picks up and the tempo starts picking up, then the tempo will go really fast. B2B buying and selling is not like that today. Everyone says that it should be 6 months, 9 months, 6 months, 9 months. It feels to me almost like the way people used to say that, well, a certain number of people are going to die after an operation anyway, before people discovered that you had to wash your hands, right? We're kind of in that era where actually a buying process should not be 9 months, if it can be 9 weeks, because oftentimes you're just unlocking some of the crud of the asymmetries of power on like both sides, because whoever has the need wants to get it fulfilled as soon as possible. And so where I'm going with that is that you know, uh, we have barely scratched the surface of this. Because even today, if you look at the most progressive companies in the world, I'm talking about anything that's not a DevOps, SecOps, DevSecOps type of tool, right? If you are New Relic, Signos, if you're any one of these companies, Datadog, Hasura, whatever, you are already in the future. The rest of the world has to catch up to you, because you give sandboxes, you give data, you give extensive documentation, test it out, try it out, touch everything in the store, break it if you want, complain to us, we'll add a new thing overnight. That does not exist in most of enterprise software. So what exists in most of enterprise software is the old contractors form. And it's crazy. I've spoken to a lot of CMOs who've told me, and I've been in the same boat, that it's not that I like it, but what's the alternative? So where I was going is that the before we get to true buyer enlightenment, actually both on the vendor buyer side as well as the next generation marketplaces, and I think the shift to cloud marketplaces, next gen cloud marketplaces, hugely empowering at the end of the day, because you feel like, okay, now I'm no shop in this mall is likely going to cheat me. And so I think there's going to be a lot of good tech coming out in this side of things. The question is really who's going to pay for it, and then to your point, ultimately, how do you change the way procurement operates? Because a buyer agent for you and me is one thing, but a buyer agent for procurement, and I think it'll happen, and it won't be spend management. I think it's a different entry point somewhere.
So one of the conversation that I have with founders is mostly like, when they think about product, and then when they think about product, they immediately start with JTBD, saying that JTBD is this great framework. We have to go understand what the jobs the customer wants to do, and that's something that will give us insight into how they can do a better business, build a better product, better business. But I kind of sometimes push back and then say, hey, JTBD is not important as much as HDTB is. HDTB is how do they buy, not just the jobs to be done, but how do they buy? So how do they buy? How is it changing that you are seeing? Like, how is it changing with AI? I mean, we talked a little bit about how people make mistakes or have incorrect mental models about how do they buy when they are coming cross border. But then what is changing now in terms of how do they buy? Because that is what is going to sort of influence on how the new AI product GTMs are going to shape up.
That's absolutely correct. So first off, a lot hasn't changed with AI coming into this process yet. I know that the vision of where this is going to head, especially on the consumer side, with what Jeremiah Wang talks about and such, that's definitely a very interesting direction. However, like it hasn't really reached the shores just yet. It's all still relatively early in terms of your biotech.
That is still narrative shaping.
It's narrative shaping, exactly. And I think even the AI SDRs, the first generation of them, are ultimately doing the old outreach plus Bombora plus Sixth Sense plus like write a bunch of generative AI emails together, but they're doing it in a way that your internal demand gen team was not doing, your internal SDR team was not doing. So it's actually great that some of these companies that are getting funded in that space are showing the power of how fast you can fill up calendars if you just had the search function work properly, right? The right automation work. Now, in terms of what is changing, I think the trust radius data, the G2 data, the Gartner data around this is like super interesting, right? A couple of quick trends. One is that definitely large brands are getting preference. I think this is because categories are getting overcrowded, so people need stronger brand signal. Partly because it's easier. This Bosch and Lomb on my desk, right, hasn't. I go into a store, I'm probably mentally like going to use Bosch and Lomb, or maybe I'll use a CVS brand, but will I use something that I've never seen before that's in a purple box? Probably not, because it's my eyes. So I think that's happening in enterprise software. People are buying much more the way they buy consumer products, which is they rely on like a brand signal. And this is hurting, right? Because 72 to 75%, I think that's the number from the 2024 survey in Trust Radius. They create a shortlist of three. 80% or 3 to 5, 80% of them buy eventually, no matter how much consideration evaluation they do, they buy somebody from that shortlist that they created before they started the process. So, true like new entrants, it's sort of like what used to be called nepotism in movie industries. Like true new talent is not really being discovered as much as it should. And that's not a good thing, actually. But buyers are relying on that sort of proxy.
It used to be called as Matthews effect in VC industry, nepotism in the movie industry, brand in the consumer industry, and that proxy of trust signal. Right. One of the things that I heard from someone long ago is in India, like the reason Tatas and Reliance are able to sort of launch oil companies and beauty brands and consumer retail companies is because they have the highest amount of trust in terms of like people trust them, saying that if they bought something from them, then it won't go wrong. And that is why they're able to sort of launch all kinds of industry and all kinds of products. And when you have the challenge of like either you have to select from too many options, or where the information is not easy to find out whether this trustable or not, then brand becomes the clear signal that people rely on making choices.
And what's super interesting on that, Ajal, is that the brand signal is not coming from where we think it used to come from. So it's not coming as much from the classic marketing channels, and it's certainly not coming from conversations with sales reps. Those are declining. It's ultimately coming from taste, feel, smell, touch the product, which is basically trials and demos and so on. Surprisingly, huge increase in it coming from peers or co-workers as much as people who've used the product. So G2, which is someone who's used that product, is good, but can I talk to somebody who's been exactly, the Indian equivalent of this would be back in the days living in Bangalore, the closest consulate for me was Chennai. So if I ended up having to go to Delhi, which I may have had to once upon a time, you want to talk to exactly someone who's been to the Delhi consulate who will tell you how to like manage your flights in and out, right? And so that's happening a lot. Is so what does that mean though? One click deeper, people are trusting other people and literally random strangers who may have bought something more than they're trusting those brands, which tells me that the GTM teams have a lot of soul searching to do. Because at the end of the day, you're putting all this stuff out, you've got all this great merchandising, right? But ultimately, the person is going to the corner store and saying, what do you think? Where's the best coffee in this like neighborhood? And if I click just one other example, how will this affect my world, and what is the ROI that I can get from this investment? This is actually a huge area of differentiation that buyers are asking for. But this is a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done on the GTM side, right? Because GTM, uh, ultimately, a lot of marketing side of GTM and the sales side of GTM is, in a sense, a consumer of the marketing side of GTM, right? Because every asset you create, every digital property, every value calculator, every whatever email template sequences, marketing creates it, sales does it. You can suck out all the salespeople of a company, and you can still have a problem because maybe they own the relationships and the marketing team have never spoken to the actual customer. But if the marketing team's assets didn't exist, you wouldn't have the repeatable motion of GTM. But the way marketing teams create it is, how do they create it? They create it like the way Walmart is created, right? Okay, we need those carpet cleaners, and we also need a section because somebody will probably want to buy milk and bananas. But the buyer is like, well, you didn't, if you asked me what I wanted, I would have said that I'm just looking for glue. Now, that is where generative AI and AI for marketing is fascinating, because ultimately what we're saying is there's a point at which a buyer is ready. When a buyer is ready, you should give them what they want, right? That's literally the best thing you can do. And if the best thing that they want is that they want this, then just get out of the way. Don't try to over and so these trends of brand signal, looking for deeper technical and value content before you buy, looking for trusted third party proxies and having like, let me touch it, feel it, not on your terms but on my terms. All of these are generating an interesting new wave of tech also. And I think the companies that are at the edge of this are definitely doing something interesting. I mean, my one of my examples in this is in pre-sales, right? So demos have always been fairly hard to nail down, and demo tech is 10 years old, nothing new. But Testbox, Alto, these kinds of companies, when I heard that they're using generative AI, generative data, synthetic data, so that you can have like different environments created with data not uh, like leaked from your master tenant or whatever. These are real problems that that ultimately, like, if you show a buyer their world in your product, that's great for the buyer. So I think now there's other trends we won't have time to get into in this podcast, but the buying groups and doing something for a buying group because everyone is trying to kind of make a consensus decision. I think the most interesting thing about this is that in tech, while of course we have a lot of net new buying because net new categories are coming up, and one could argue that if you can build a Gen AI support app that is the next Zendesk or the next Cluzo, and you can build it faster than them, then in some sense, apps become Gen AI B2B apps become like Zara fashion cycles, and I think that's good for the consumer, right? You just need a different business model than to like support it. But ultimately, a lot of it is replacement buying today. And I think that replacement buyer is something that I think is worth like a deep dive on in talking to experts, because the replacement buyer has already been burnt once. They don't want to make the same mistake again. And if you could just if you take this last sort of closing note on that, if you take this all the way back to the the pinnacle uh, like Latin lines of capitalism, right? It comes down to fair exchange of value, fair exchange of pricing, fair and reasonable exchange of discovery of information on both sides, so that the marketplace remains fair. I think that that is a really interesting uh, opportunity in the next like 5 to 7 years, and I'm excited about where CMOs will play a role, CPOs will play a role, because I think they'll play a bigger role than CROs.
So what was most exciting for me in what you just now described is that most people, in terms of brand signal, they're not looking just for the touch points or like, something which is had like a legacy or anything like that, but it is more around, hey, somebody who looks like me, feels like me, what did he experience? And that is what they are going and relying on, and as much direct as possible, as opposed to not coming through like a moderated platform, things like that, which to me says that it is back to those old work on good word of mouth, right? And back to my, like, the earlier question, which is like, product led versus the enterprise sales. Looks like even if you're putting a lot of structure and organization around like getting an enterprise sales motion going, what you still need to do is to actually make sure that you have gotten like what are good practices around the product led growth, where you are building a product that is so awesome that people feel like relieved using it, and because they are so relieved, then they go and tell two friends, and two friends tell another three friends.
And when it breaks, when you don't get what you need, when you put in a request, how the customer success and support frontier shapes your experience. Brand is shaped a lot more by that these days. And I think this is where a lot of founders get confounded, because, or CEOs. I think, founders probably, or product founders are a little different this way. But they say, but our product is superior. The IDC report says that our product is superior. We got the highest scores on roadmap. I don't understand. Why didn't they buy it? You must not have explained it properly. But the thing is, that person is talking to, it's like if you were to, if you're an investor and, I'm a startup and you and I didn't know each other. And you're like, you know what, I'm going to talk to 7 people about Amit. Just generally talk to 7 people. There'll probably be 2 people who'll say, you know, they'll be like, whoa, he's too funky, or, he talks too fast. And I don't know, like he's got a unique way of approaching problems, too intense, whatever, right? And you'll average that feedback out and be like, okay, I kind of know what I'm walking into, right? This is something that CEOs and founders and especially new startups, I think they need to embrace. And this is why, as you said, good word of mouth is your employees' word of mouth. It's your, like, literally your community's word of mouth. And doing good, doing well, I don't think those things are going to change in the future, because at the end of the day, yes, people won't always buy from people. I do think that people may empower AIs to buy on behalf of them from AIs who are on the other side. I think we'll see some of that sort of happen, but ultimately, I think a lot of it just comes down to, are you, as a company, creating a virtuous cycle? Are you creating a vicious cycle? And the last thing I'll say about that, as it ties to one of the biggest challenges of enterprise sales that existed, Rajan, was it wasn't just that you had too few sellers. I mean, I get that you had too few sellers, and sales is hard. In any kind of sales is really hard. So kudos to that generation that didn't have Salesforce, or maybe had Salesforce but didn't have anything else, and their calls couldn't be recorded. They couldn't get sentiment analysis and all of that stuff that modern salespeople probably benefit from. However, at the end of the day, most CROs only paid 15% or 12% commission to their sales reps. They maybe paid a nice, cute little bonus to customer success and maybe to some of the pre-sales engineers, but product didn't get anything, marketing didn't get anything. I encourage more CEOs and founders to take the bold step and say, wait a minute, how did this deal actually get sourced? Let me ask the buyer, why did you actually buy? And if the buyer says, the number one reason I bought this product is because your person X, whoever person X was, I just, had a great time with them. Yeah, sales was good too. But then figure out a way to be fair to all of them, versus the idea today, which I think it's a relic idea. It'll die eventually, right? The world does get better over time. That you needed an adult who looks like Alec Baldwin from 30 Rock to start the sales process. And that's when it starts. And then everything revolves around them and you help them. And they're the quarterback. And then they close the deal. And then they get the big bucks and they go to President's Club. What about that data analyst? What about that poor PM sitting out somewhere who built your demo tenant for like 720 hours on the basis of which they bought? Not because the guy had great smile and shoes, right? But I just want to end with the opportunity to change incentive structures in GTM. I think is a very interesting subtopic.
That's the end of part 1, where Amit and I discussed AI tools, marketing, and GTM in AI. We'll dive into go-to-market strategies, CRM, and how is AI reshaping global sales and marketing. Join us in the next episode.